What will American conservatives stand for after the Donald Trump era? Believe it or not, that debate is already happening on the political right, and it has showed up in notable ways in recent days at the Turning Point USA conference in Arizona, and remarks by Vivek Ramaswamy, Ted Cruz, Ben Shapiro, J.D. Vance, and others.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch. That is our subject for today. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the opinion pages of the Journal, and I'm here with my colleagues Barton Swain and Kim Strasso. So let's talk about the debate on the right and among Republicans. Donald Trump has dominated Republican politics, conservative politics for a decade, but even though he has 3 more years left in office, the battle for the future of the movement and the party is underway. J.D. Vance, I think it's fair to say, wants to be the heir apparent to Trump, and that includes support from nearly all of his supporters, including the likes of Tucker Carlson after his softball interview with the Nazi admirer Nick Fuentes, as well as Candace Owens, another polarizing podcast figure. But Ben Shapiro, another pundit, gave a speech saying that the party needs ideological border control, and that excludes some ideas and people who preach racial bigotry or anti-Semitism. Let's listen to Shapiro and then Carlson's response at Turning Point USA.
The conservative movement is also in danger from charlatans who claim to speak in the name of principle, but actually traffic in conspiracism and dishonesty, who offer nothing but bile and despair, who seek to undermine fundamental principles of conservatism by championing enervation and grievance. These people are frauds, and they are grifters, and they do not deserve your time. And they are something worse than that, a danger to the only movement capable of stopping the left from wrecking the country wholesale.
And so the attack, and you heard it from the stage tonight, there's someone here who's a very bad man, and he's friends with J.D. Vance. Could be me. I am sad about being used in a proxy war over politics in which I'm not involved in any level. I'm not an advisor to anybody. But I just think I should say that out loud.
Wow. Should add that Steve Bannon, one of the main mega podcasters, called Ben Shapiro, a cancer, but said it, and it's spreading. But Kim, what do you think of this debate?
Well, I think if you want to talk about the debate, you have to talk about what's actually happening. What are the dividing lines here? And obviously, this really started getting attention with the Tucker Carlson Fuentes interview, but it's been going on for a long time, Paul. And it's been the rise of an anti-Semitic streak within the party as voiced within the movement, as voiced by Nick Fuentes and others. And then allowed to broadcast basically with no pushback at all from Tucker Carlson on his quite well-watched podcast. Also, I think to a lesser extent, but it is important, is this turn that you've had in the movement toward more, for lack of a better word, so populist party principles, about ideological principles, about the role of limited government, et cetera, and some different views there. And this is beginning to really break out and take sides. One thing I would like to point out, because I do think this is important, is we showed both of those clips there. This was taking part at Turning Point Action America Fest. The very first speaker there was Erica Kirk, who has been calling out conspiracy theorists like Candace Owens, who come up with some really wild ideas. And the second speaker was Ben Shapiro. And I think that was a statement by Turning Point, that he was put up there before anyone else. Yes, Tucker Carlson was allowed to speak and other people were up on the stage. But it's important what Ben Shapiro did, and the audience that was there. Erica Kirk was noting that about 1/3 of the attendees at this event were students. They've had more than 140,000 people have submitted requests to join that organization since Kirk's death. Membership of over 1 million across 4,000 chapters in high schools and colleges. This is the new generation. And they need to be hearing this debate and hopefully coming out on the right side, which is obviously the side that rejects anti-Semitism, et cetera. there are some people like Tucker Carlson. You just saw him there. They want to pretend this isn't happening. They're not part of it. They're not really divide. That's Tucker's thing all the time. I'm just asking questions, I'm not taking a position. That's baloney. We've all seen Tucker Carlson do interviews where he pushes back very strongly and hotly against people he disagrees with. He just let Nick Fuentes speak. And people need to know that it's a toxic and vile, and that the significant majority of the conservative movement is opposed to it, because left unfettered, that is indeed how things grow.
Barton, one of the points that Shapiro made is this point about the movement the party needs ideological border control. And of course, Tucker Carlson's response to that is, they're just trying to censor me. And they are just like the left, conservatives who say that. Now, nobody is censoring Tucker Carlson. He's got this huge audience at his podcast. He gets attention from the press for whatever he says. But the right has been arguing against left-wing censorship for so much time there. I think that some people are vulnerable to thinking, oh, yeah, okay, and maybe agreeing with that. But what do you make of this concept of ideological border control?
Well, it's something that everybody believes in border controls. It's just a question of which ones. Shapiro and others, I think, are making the entirely reasonable argument that you have to exclude from your movement kooks and anti-Semites. Mm-hmm. Number one, when you let them in, you vitiate your own ideas and your own cause. Number two, you make yourself loathsome to the electorate. It's a practical, entirely reasonable argument. I think, Carlson saying that, well, you're just attacking Vance is a complete dodge. And Vance, for his part, is, he begins his speech by talking about along the same lines, talking about how you shouldn't be imposing purity tests, I think his phrase was.
Right. That was his phrase, yeah.
And so, I'm thinking, is this J.D. Vance? 10 minutes ago, I went through his Twitter feed really quickly just to look. He spends half his time attacking other Republicans. I noted one that said, the Indiana GOP needs to choose a side. I think that's a purity test.
Yeah, sounds like.
He talks about America Last Republicans. I saw he got in a fight with some Republican influencer he called a loser. Purity test is the phrase is a rhetorical sleight of hand. We all believe in purity tests. If you believe this idea, you belong to that party. If you take a different idea, you belong in the other party. Parties, I think Disraeli said, are just organized opinion. So Vance and Carlson remind me a little about of the way liberals a generation ago used to use the word tolerance. We tolerate everyone except people we deem to be intolerant. And Vance and Carlson, they're in favor of the big tent that only excludes people that we don't like. Okay, well, that's just rhetorical cheating, and it's kind of it's frustrating to deal with. I think you make a good point that we've complained about free speech so long that a lot of especially younger conservatives are probably mixing their categories and not really understanding what's involved here.
Let me read a quote from Vance's speech that addresses a couple of things that Barton was saying. Quote, President Trump did not build the greatest coalition in politics by running his supporters through endless self-defeating purity tests, Vance said. We have far more important work to do than canceling each other, end quote. That's an interesting locution, as Barton says. Kim, I think what it suggests to me is that Vance just doesn't want to take a really firm position here. I mean, he has said, he's denounced Nick Fuentes and others who criticize his wife, Usha, who is Indian American, and rightly so. But he will not draw a line against Owens or Tucker Carlson or others who play footsie with some of the bigots. and these some of these young folks who are groypers who also toy with ideas about white supremacy and so on. I think it's interesting and I think it's he's taking a political position by saying, I'm not going to take a political position.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And by the way, and just one last word on this gatekeeping or deplatforming or cancel culture or whatever you want to call it. I mean, Barton actually said this really well in a piece. He did this recently. I will actually quote Barton, saying that this was a term reserved for people who committed a minor infraction of progressive orthodoxy. That's what cancel culture is. You get your reputation ruined. You're run out of your job. You're not allowed to speak anywhere, anytime. That's very different than going out of your way, as Tucker Carlson, to give completely abhorrent people a microphone and amplifying what they have to say and not pushing back on it. And I think it's really important that especially young people are understanding this free speech argument. But I think you're absolutely correct, Paul, on J.D. Vance. He's, in my mind, got the wrong end of the political stick. He seems to think that he's going to need these folks as part of his coalition to get out and vote. And it's weird. This is actually a threat that the Nick Fuenteses make when they're out there, which is, you don't want to lose the groypers, man. We'll destroy you. We'll take you out. I mean, all 5 of them, or, 25 of them. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not a movement of people out there, but the suggestion that they are consequential in the conservative coalition at the time they are, I think, if left unchecked, and the GOP and the conservative movement and the leadership allow them free reign and say nothing and give tacit endorsement, then they have the potential to actually grow that ideology to spread. But right now, this is not predominant. So he's betting somehow that he needs to have these people in. And I would argue it's a very bad calculation, because as Barton said in the beginning, one of the problems here is that it vitiates your own ideas. But it also makes you abhorrent to the general election. I think in this case, too, even in a primary to the wider GOP primary electorate that Vance is going to be running in. And there are going to be people who challenge him. I do believe that, regardless of whether or not Donald Trump crowns him or not. The job of president of the United States is pretty big plum. And, there's going to be a lot of people that see this, the end of the Trump era, as a big opening to become the next president and the next GOP nominee. So he's not going to have a clear run of it. And this, in my mind, this is baggage that can hurt a candidate. And the choosing of sides is going to be important. He's not doing that at the moment, but I think that's poor political instincts.
Well, and it's going to be a reflection on his political character. What is he willing to accept or not? Another angle here has been raised by Vivek Ramaswamy, who is now running for governor of Ohio as a Republican. He's the front runner and is likely to win, I would say, next year. But of course, he ran for president in 2024 before dropping out and endorsing Donald Trump, and has been a big supporter of President Trump. He is now talking about rejecting something he calls the Heritage American idea, Heritage Americans. It's an idea now popular in some parts of the right, that you are more authentically American the longer you have roots here. In other words, if you're a daughter of the American Revolution going back to the founding, or I guess maybe Plymouth Rock, you're more authentically American than if you just arrived last Thursday. Or just to get personal here, my ancestors in the 1860s. Sorry, they weren't here in the revolutionary generation, but they pulled an oar or two in the American experiment. I'm glad they did. Now, Ramaswamy says that's not how long you're here is not the test of whether you're an authentic American. It's when you arrive. It's not when you arrive, but what you believe and practice, and whether you practice the beliefs of the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, that is, Barton, I think, an implicit criticism of J.D. Vance, who has given some notable speeches, one including at the Republican convention in 2024 and recently this year at Claremont University, where he kind of pointedly said, no, we need to be more unified, and we need to be more unified as a country by place and the implicit ethnicity, and that immigrants, widespread immigration, is a threat to that unity. So we've got an interesting divide here too, Barton.
Yeah, I was glad that Vivek Ramaswamy gave that speech. I thought it was courageous, as was Shapiro's. He also wrote a piece in the New York Times, essentially laying out a similar argument. And I think he has a unique way of, I think, addressing a younger audience that's appealing. I think we can feel that there's something to the argument, or there's a kernel in the argument that some of the I don't know, not Buchananite, but Vance and his allies are making, in this sense that there are some cultures, some societies that when you invite them in large numbers, don't function well in American society. And that is because they don't accept the doctrines of the American experiment. They reject the American ideal. So in some ways, these two ideas are not totally incompatible, but I think that when Vance and others take them to the degree they do and suggest that, well, they almost suggest, if you're not, as you say, if you're not from, your parents didn't come on the Mayflower or whatever. And of course, liberals are going to hear that and interpret it, and the media will interpret it as if you're not white, which is its own sort of political disadvantage. So I think it's a stupid argument. It's shallow. And I think on Vance's part, at least, it bespeaks the fact that he came to politics late and he's still in flux, like a lot of people we know who did come to politics at a sort of in their 30s or whatever. He's still in flux even at this stage. And I'm glad that Vivek and others are putting up a fight.
Well, if you believe in the necessity of assimilation into America, well, I agree with that 100%. That is essential. If you're an immigrant, if you enter the country, you're signing up for certain American principles, or you should leave. And cultural assimilation has always been a certain kind of American miracle. We have a talent for it in a way that the French don't, for example, or the Germans don't. And certainly the Japanese don't, having spent some time in Japan. And for that matter, the Chinese, yeah. They have their national understandings much more rooted in ethnicity and to exclude outsiders. The American way has always been somewhat different. So I think that if Vance were talking about assimilation, Kim, I think he would get a lot of support. It's when you start to kind of get on the edge of blood and soil conservatism that you can get, I think, into trouble. And I think it's interesting that Ramaswamy is challenging him on that. And of course, we have Ted Cruz, who I think is going to run for president in 2028, also talking about it, hitting hard previously, some weeks ago, on anti-Semitism on the right in particular.
Well, whenever we have these debates, there's always the crude, two ugly sides aspect of it from a top level. And, you've seen that recently in this story about the fraud that was going on in Minnesota. And I think you can make a very good argument that this is a time for some nuance there, talking about the Somali communities there and problems of assimilation. and what that has meant for that particular area. That would be the nuanced version of it. The non-nuanced version of it is kind of what you get from J.D. Vance or from Donald Trump, which is like, you ought to just go home. We don't need any immigrants in this country. Like, this is what comes. They come and they, just suck out the country with no any intellectualism about the history of the nation and assimilation, etc. So I am very pleased to see Vivek actually trying to have the conversation in those terms instead, in the more nuanced fashion. Because, you can either have the blunt and ugly debate, which isn't really getting into the details, or you can finally wander around and get your finger on the right point. And the assimilation question is the right point. And let me just say too, I'm actually really glad we're having this debate, because one of the problems here as well is, if you listen to J.D. Vance in the speech he gave at Turning Point, if you listen to Kevin Roberts at Heritage when he was trying to excuse the fact that he wasn't going to break ties with Tucker Carlson, their argument is, we need to not be having fights among friends. We all need to be together on the right so that we can go after the left. No enemies to the right. And the problem with that is, there are many problems with it. And by the way, yes, the left has many problems. They have their own anti-Semitism problem. And obviously party unity is good at times and when necessary. But this is an existential question for the movement. And it's not only one on moral grounds the party needs to be having, the movement needs to be having, but for political, just practical reasons as well, too, because that kind of philosophy, again, is where that big tent, there's no problem, we're not going to level any criticism. It's that's when you begin to alienate average voters, and it cost Republicans elections, and you put the country in bigger danger as well too.
And just to close today, let's talk about Heritage. Kim mentioned Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation. They've lost a lot of their intellectual leaders, policy shop leaders, some of them of late. But now there's a big defection that occurred today. This is Monday, December 22nd, with three of its largest most important policy shops moving wholesale over to Mike Pence's Advancing American Freedom Foundation. Includes the Ed Meese Center on the Law and Justice. Ed Meese being the former Attorney General of Ronald Reagan, longtime Heritage standard bearer. And you have their free market think tank, the Roe Institute, and their data analysis shop. I talked with former Vice President Pence on the weekend. He told me that these people came to him and they said, look, we're stifled at Heritage. We can't say what we believe or find out from a data point of view, and we need a new home. Would you be that home? And so they're going over there. Pence's board has raised something like close to $15 million, so these people can now set up shop there for at least 3 years. It's a big loss, I think, for Heritage, and just underscores the degree to which the way that Kevin Roberts has approached his job and the Trump administration is essentially blowing up this venerable institution.
Yeah, I think this has roots as far back as Jim DeMint's ascension as Heritage's president. I think it was 2012, 2013, in there somewhere. It was during Obama's second term. The Tea Party was sort of a big thing in Republican circles. There was very much a hunger among the electorate for action, for reaction. The dissatisfaction with Republicans for always talking about policy and making concessions, and we need people who will stand up and fight and so on. And it really turned that organization toward the model of being a kind of quasi-political. I know it has two arms, a policy and political, but it turned it in that direction. And I think that was a mistake. Think tanks are called think tanks for a reason. They're designed to take a back seat and to inform policymakers about, the best choices before them. And the temptation, of course, in any nonprofit, and especially large nonprofits like this one, the temptation is always to tell your donors that you're making things happen. There's always a tendency to exaggerate, and on the other side to do things that you probably shouldn't be doing in order to impress those donors. I'm not suggesting dishonesty on anybody's part, but that's just a natural dynamic in a think tank or in a nonprofit. The problem is nobody elected a think tank president or senator, and the job of the organization is to inform and to research and to make arguments and information available, not to push people around and whip votes. I think under Roberts, Heritage tried to present itself as though it were calling the shots in a second Trump term. And of course, Trump didn't like that very much at all. And that's when the real trouble started, the rift between Trump and Heritage. And then Heritage became a liability because of it oversold its Project 2025, and that became a talking point in the media and on the Democratic convention. And I think a lot of this is owing to policy drift. With the election of Donald Trump, he was elected apart from immigration, he wasn't really elected for a set of policies as we think of that term. It was a reaction to the imperialist left of the Obama years. And over the years, Republicans generally, I think, and certainly in the nonprofit world, have forgotten what their role is and left policy to others and focused more on power. And that's been a real mistake, and it's going to have to be unmade over these next few years.
Kevin Roberts famously has said, like to use the phrase, including taunting us at the Wall Street Journal, you don't know what time it is. Mm-hmm. And that's a reference to the fact that, you guys who believe in traditional conservatism as defined in the previous decades, free markets, global leadership by the United States, the famous Reagan three-legged stool. You got to get with it. You're not hip. You don't know what time it is, and he kind of has taunted us for some time with this. But I think the problem he has is that there actually are an awful lot of people who are in this think tank world or in this universe who got into it for those ideas. And when you suddenly say, you know what, those aren't relevant anymore, you're going to have this kind of rebellion internally and maybe at the donor level.
Well, let me just say, in terms of what time it is, look, good for Kevin Roberts. He's going to have a lot more wall space to hang up all of his clocks and all of those empty offices after everybody's gone over to Mike Pence's organization. I think this is really important because as I noted at the beginning of the podcast, we've been talking about these big, ugly fights, which have really dominated the headlines because the media loves to make them about them with regards to anti-Semitism. And that's the ugly bit. But the other huge part of this is, and this has been a longer time coming, is, if Kevin Roberts had gone out and said one unfortunate thing about Tucker Carlson, but he had an organization where everybody loved their jobs and felt they were doing amazing policy work, that might have been a forgivable moment. But this is a culmination of several years now of him taking that polishes shop in the direction of what's increasingly called national conservatism, or some people ally it with Trump. I'm not so certain that Trump necessarily approves of some of the policy directions you're seeing from Vance and some other of the younger adherents of that philosophy. But suddenly they're running around saying, oh yeah, let's get rid of right to work, and let's do national industrial policy, and we're all for tariffs, and let's tax millionaires because these things all sound good, and we can make the blue collar workers angry and make common cause with union bosses, etc. If you are a person who's worked in the policy shop at Heritage, and you and I are old, Paul, like Heritage has been around a long time, Heritage was the Reagan policy Bible, right? I mean, they are limited government and they can't wrap their heads around this, nor do they want to be told that this is the new philosophy that they must adhere to for a new modern, knowing what the time it is, heritage. So while I think this Kevin Roberts moment with Tucker Carlson gave them an excuse to act on frustrations that go way beyond even the question of Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, but about this much deeper, wider breach in the conservative movement at the moment about the very direction of the party from a policy perspective and a leadership perspective. And again, it's good to be having that debate. And I agree with you. I would still say, if you look at the donors, you look at the membership, you look at where people are migrating to, you look at the folks that are getting elected, there is a lot stronger and much, much, much bigger. The vast majority of that coalition is still very much a Reagan Republican coalition.
All right, Kim, thank you. Thank you, Barton. Thank you all for listening. We are here every day on Potomac Watch, the podcast of Wall Street Journal opinion pages. Thanks for listening.